Talk about an unintended consequence, and a very serious one. This war in Ukraine is turning out brilliantly for China, for the communist dictatorship. It's getting stronger, the West is getting weaker. And that's the big picture behind US President Joe Biden's meeting in Indonesia this week with China's dictator Xi Jinping. In how many ways is China winning this Ukraine war? Well, here are just a few. For a start, weapons. Now you look at the money, most of it for weapons that the West has been throwing at Ukraine to make sure it beats the Russian invaders. We are talking huge amounts. 52 billion euros just from the US. That's about 54 billion in US dollars. European Union, in contrast, dragging the chain, but still pouring in 29 billion. Canada, Australia, and the others also contribute billions. And let's draw a contrast. How much is China giving Russia in military aid? Not $1, not 1 ruble, nothing. But this is actually more important than simply money. It's more dangerous as well. You have to look at actual weapons. And remember, weapons do take time to produce. You give too many away, you run short yourself. Here is another graphic from the Kiel Institute of World Economy, tracing supplies of heavy weapons to Ukraine. You see, Norway has handed over almost a quarter of its own. It shares a border with Russia and really needs Russia to be beaten here. Britain has handed over around 12% of its supplies of heavy weapons. Germany nearly 8%, France 5%, and the US 3%. In fact, President Biden's Undersecretary of Defense for Policy said last week, supplying hardware like this, well, there's no question that it's put pressure on our own stockpiles. It's put pressure on our own industrial base. And that's been true of our allies. Now, this is such a problem that the US has now tapped South Korea to hand over 100,000 rounds of artillery ammunition for Ukraine. You've got to remember, South Korea, well, it faces its own enemy, North Korea, just over its border. It's badly needing to be fully armed itself, because you never know with North Korea. And let me ask again, is the West, the US, handing over so much military hardware to Ukraine that the pips are squeaking? How much has China handed to Russia from its own supplies? Absolutely nothing. Not even a knife or a rifle or a pistol, nothing. So, talking armaments, the West getting weaker, China stronger. And I do mean stronger. Look at another thing that this West is copying while China is growing. Look at another thing that the war is doing. The West has hit Russia with all kinds of sanctions to punish it for its invasion, to drag it down, to make sure it's beaten. Now, all that's working in one way. I mean, it's certainly crippling Russia. But it does come at a huge cost to the West. You see already an energy crisis in the West that's feeding high inflation. Now, how's this worked out for China? Well, again, it's cleaned up. It's bought record volumes of this Russian gas and Russian oil that the West has boycotted. It's snapped it up at bargain prices too, because who else can Russia sell to? Russia's becoming essentially, in some ways, almost the colony of China. It's dependent now on China. So we see the West getting weaker and again China getting stronger. And China knows it. In fact, it's now planning for it. On state television last weekend, Chinese state television, controlled by the Communist Party, it featured a visit that President Xi made to the Joint Operations Command Center of his military commission, where he told his commanders that the security outlook was increasingly unstable and uncertain, and they should all act as if at war, as the state media reported. Xi emphasized that the entire army must focus all its energy on fighting wars, focus all work on fighting wars, speed up the improvement of its ability to win. China is preparing for war over Taiwan, but also for war with the US if it does try to defend that island democracy, as President Joe Biden says it will. On the other hand, you've got the commander of the US Strategic Command who's told the Wall Street Journal that the US military is not ready for war. Admiral Charles Richard said the big one is coming, and it isn't going to be very long before we're going to get tested in ways we haven't been tested for a long time. As I assess our level of deterrence against China, the ship is slowly sinking. They are putting capability in the field faster than we are, and that is a very near-term problem. What he's saying, China's weaponry is increasing and increasing, and this is while the US is using what it has, and the Admiral says is not enough, some of it it's sending to Ukraine. Now, I am certainly not saying the West should support Ukraine. Russia must be defeated. China must be shown that invasions like this one will be defeated. So don't get any ideas about invading Taiwan. That said, I am saying that this war is bleeding the West and feeding China. And at some stage, the West, and particularly the US, has got to ask itself, who is our biggest threat by far? Is it really Russia, now so pathetic and weak that it's getting smashed in Ukraine? Yes, with American help. Even after Russia has thrown in about 80% of its military might, I mean, Russia now is broken. Or is the biggest threat, by far, the Chinese dictatorship? The biggest economy in the world, bristling with weapons, high on confidence, its leader dressing himself in military uniform, telling his top leaders to prepare for war. A China that is getting stronger from this war in Ukraine. And if the answer is, as it obviously is, China, yes, that is the biggest threat by far. The next question is, does the West have the weapons to resist that superpower? And how many more such weapons can we afford to send to Ukraine? I hate putting that question because I am a passionate supporter of the Ukraine resistance. Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. He's poisoned the Russian culture. He's a menace to Europe. And please, peace demands that he lose. But if war with China is coming in the very near term, that, more than war in Ukraine, is the war that will be catastrophic for the West to lose. What shape are we in to fight?